We're going to start with this image. What I'd like you to do is just take a moment. I'm going to read it to you. You're all fully capable of reading your own stuff. I'd like you to do is take a look at this and see if any of these, if you connect to any of these things that teachers say or the things that we'd like students to do. Willing to bet that every single one of you has either thought or said these out loud, and wished, maybe not all of them, but at least some of them, and wished that uh, those things that on that right hand column were the things that were actually happening. And that's the goal of what we're going to be doing today. This focuses on the idea of dispositions, but we're going to kind of tailor it specifically through the STEAM lens. We're going to look at something called a continuum of engagement by Amy Berry. We're going to kind of connect those to the STEAM aspect of this, so connect dispositions to STEAM through that engagement piece. And then the last part of it will be focused on developing that culture around dispositions and how you can do that. So dispositions go by a lot of different names. The school I came at, we call them habits of scholarship. My wife's school calls them how grades, habits of work. Other people have all sorts of different names for them. But those are the things we're talking about when we say dispositions are like respect and responsibility. But it's much bigger than that. It can include a lot of different things. And in fact, it can be relatively challenging to define. So what we're going to start with is a definition. And again, I'm not going to read it to you, but take a minute and read this to yourself or out loud to a friend or out loud to yourself. I talk to myself all the time. Feel free. So this definition is from a guy named Ron Rickert, who is works for Project Zero out of Harvard, and um, it's part of a book called Dispositions by Arthur Costa and Bennett Gaelic. And that book is kind of the outline that I used to design this PD. And the book is really great. It's a little dry, but it's a good book to read. This is one of the definitions that they use in the book. And the first time I read this, I did not understand it at all. So I'm going to, what we're going to do is we're going to break this definition down and talk about each part, because there's some really important pieces in here that get lost in vocabulary. So that's what we're going to start with, is let's define dispositions in some way. So we're going to start with, actually, before I do that, Mary, will you drop the slide deck link in the chat for me, please? I want everybody to be able to follow along if you'd like to. I sent everybody an email yesterday with the slide deck in it, but in case you need it, Mary's gonna put it in the chat for me. That way you can follow along, click on things, do all that kind of stuff. We'll put links into the chat as we go, but just in case you want both. So we're gonna start with the first sentence. Required patterns of behavior that are under one's control and will, as opposed to being automatically activated. So what does this mean? Well, basically, it's saying that we can teach these things, right? That they're learned over time, that dispositions are things that students don't inherently come with, and that they can build through support and scaffolding and practice, that we can really work with this and that they have control over whether or not they use them or not. So that would mean that things like perseverance or respect, collaboration, even being willing to be open-minded are choices that students can make or not make. With that idea in mind, that gives us a little bit more control over how we how we look at dispositions in a classroom. Because if it is a choice, then we can talk to kids in such a way that says, this isn't a, you're making this choice, here's another choice, or we can support them in some way. And we'll talk more about how that all works later. But that's kind of an important piece of this, is that they can be learned and they can be controlled, that we have that choice, that students get to make that choice. So the second sentence, overarching sets of behaviors, not just single specific behaviors. Now, this is an interesting idea because I don't know about address you, but I taught middle school. So we had like a habits of scholarship grade, a score every quarter, every quarter. And it was like respect. And then there was a list of indicators and responsibility and a list of indicators. But we never took the time to really think about what that meant. There was like stuff that people do, like this is what you do if you're respectful. You don't interrupt the teacher. You don't hit your friend with a chair. Like you don't run out of the room screaming. Like not that specific, but like you get the general idea, right? Like those are the things that show respect. But we never really thought about the idea of like maybe something as simple as listening as a disposition requires a lot of other things going on at the same time to be able to do that well. And it blew my mind because I've been doing this, like I've been thinking about this and learning about dispositions for a long time. And this idea just like was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Because if you look at the example, like listening, it requires you to pay attention, paraphrase, inquire because you're curious about what's happening, keep track of your thoughts, take turns, and have self-control. Those are all skills by themselves that need practice. But then let's take it a step further and think about respect. Skillful listening is an aspect of respect. So if you think about respect and then we think skillful listening is part of that, then that means that in order to be respectful, you have to be a listener. In order to be a listener, you need to be able to pay attention, paraphrase, inquire, keep track of your thoughts, take turns, and have self-control. Like that's a lot. That's a lot for a kid to wrap their brains around, even though they're consciously doing it, but just like subconsciously keeping track of all those things. And then when is it taught? Right? Like we practice these things, but is it ever really explained like, oh, in order to be a good listener, these are the characteristics, these are the dispositions that you need in order to do that. I never thought about that before. I just like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. I never really got it. And it absolutely makes sense. But there's also danger in this, in that it's a very, very deep rabbit hole. Because you could easily be like, oh, well, I can't teach respect until I teach listening. And I can't teach listening until I teach paraphrasing. I can't teach paraphrasing until I teach keeping track of your thoughts. And I can't keep track of your thoughts if you don't have any self-control. And I can't teach self-control because, right, like it's easy to get down this hole of like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to do this. But you already are. We're already doing these things anyway. We may not be consciously doing them, but we're 100% already doing them. So we don't need to dive super, super deep in it. This is more of just a kind of an opportunity to understand what's going on here. What part is the struggle? And then what you can do is we can take that piece that is the struggle. Maybe in terms of listening, it's taking turns. And we can recognize that as a barrier for a student when it comes to listening and support them as they work through that process so they become a better listener, right? So that's part of it, is a better understanding of that it's multiple things, multiple dispositions make up dispositions, but also that we can go in there and really figure out where kids are getting stuck and help them and support them as they travel, as they learn how to work through that. So the next sentence, dynamic, this was the one that just was like, what on earth is this trying to say? Dynamic and idiosyncratic in their contextualized deployment rather than prescribed actions to be rigidly carried out. Like that is a sentence. That is a sentence. But here's what it means. It means that we don't walk around with pieces of paper in our hands saying, okay, when somebody is, when I need to be respectful, check mark listening, check mark persevering, check mark talking politely, check mark. We don't do that, right? Kids don't do that. It is an internal map that we build over time. And if that's the case, then that means in order to practice this, students need to practice in authentic ways, that they have to have the practice of respect or responsibility or perseverance or any of those things. They have to be able to practice those things in actual situations where they can design their maps in their brains. And then we need to throw them curveballs every once in a while so that they figure out that the path goes this way. And sometimes it's got a little offshoot path that goes off to this side. And sometimes it has an offshoot path that goes off to this side because I'm being respectful. But if somebody's being disrespectful to me, I don't continue to be respectful, but I also don't deviate, jump off the trail, run through the woods screaming, calling them names, right? Like I got to come back, got to move over, take a side trail of how to deal with that situation, and then come back to being respectful. So that's what we're doing here is we're building these up so that students don't have to think about them, right? Because I mean, I don't think about them often. We're going to think about them today, but I don't think about them very often. So the next one, more than desire and will, dispositions must be coupled with requisite ability. I think this analogy of it's like, think of someone who wants to hit a home run but doesn't know how to swing a bat. If your students aren't ready, they're not ready. And that means we dive down into the previous slide where we're talking about all the little dispositions that make up the big overarching ones. And we can start working on that. But if they're not ready, they're not ready. They have to be developmentally ready to learn those skills. It's just the way it is. That's a pretty easy one. And then dispositions motivate, activate, and direct our abilities. So this is an interesting one because that first bullet really kind of hits on this, that people are more likely to act on beliefs they embrace, which affects their interpretations of dispositions. Now, that's a big idea because if I'm driving down the road and I see a bumper sticker that has some sort of creative, profane word and then somebody's name, say it's a political person, you are either going to agree or disagree with that bumper sticker, right? And that person very much agrees with that bumper sticker because they put it on their car. I assume they put it on their car. They're going to agree with that. You may disagree with that, and that's fine. But in their world, using that profanity is totally respectful. Talking about a president or a governor or some sort of anything, it doesn't matter what it is, right, is respectful. And that feels weird because if you then see the exact same thing, same word, same profane word in front, but the second word is cancer, we all have a different feeling about that. So I don't feel nearly as like, oh, well, no, I think it's great. We shouldn't do that. Like, that's not how that works. Like, we should keep, cancer is great. We should absolutely keep it. Like, that's a ridiculous thing to say. So the interpretation that people have of what they're saying and what they're doing changes based on their beliefs. That's what that's saying, which means that what's respectful at home may not, what parents at home define as respectful may not be the same thing that we as school define as respectful. And now we've really got that problem. And I'm willing to bet that almost every single one of you has run into this problem at least once in your career. I have multiple times of, well, that's just like, what do you mean I can't use that word in school? I use it at home all the time. Or what do you mean I can't say this thing or treat this person this way? That's just the way it is. So what's the solution to this, right? Because that's hard to fight against. Be like, well, you can't tell them, well, you're wrong, because, right, we can't say that. So how do we deal with this? And here's how I figured it out. This is what I did, is that I differentiated between the places. And I said, look, when you're there, that's your expectation. That's fine. You do what you want. Like, your parents are responsible for you. But when you're here at school, this is that expectation, because we have to deal with it all the time, right? The way I act at work, the way I speak at work, the way I'm speaking right now in this PD is different than the way I would if I was home with my wife and my kids. I have two different situations. Now, the dispositions that I use when I'm working remotely or when I'm doing PD, or the dispositions you're using right now, to watch this and to listen to this are different than the ones you would use when you're teaching, right? You're using different ones. They may even be the same, you're just using them in different ways. So for students, it really is like, that's great. When you're at home, that's that. When you're here at school, this is this, which means that everybody in the school has to be on board with what these things mean. If respect means one thing in one classroom, and it means something else in a different classroom, kids are going to be confused, right? As a school, as a team, whatever, however you organize yourself, it's important that we think about dispositions in the same way and that we all come to an agreed upon definition and expectation about what those are, because then we can make that argument. Here in school, that is not respectful. And I've always been shocked by how well that works. I had a student once who came in, he was a new student, and all it took was, that's not how we do things here in this school. And he changed his behavior relatively quickly because he saw his peers not doing the same thing as him, and he stood out. It's a really hard line that I'm sure you're all walking in some way, but it is important that we recognize that. And one solution to that problem is, that's one place, this is a separate place. That's the way it is. In fact, there's a great Sesame Street skit with Ed Sheeran song that talks about like what you do at home and what you do at school and how different those things are. And my middle school kids love to watch it. It was silly and funny, and they enjoyed it every single time I did it. So the last part of this is a simplification, right? Ron's definition, and I want to go back to that real quick here. Let me go back here so we can look at it one more time before we look at a kind of a simplified version of it. Ron's disposition is great. It's a very good definition of dispositions, but it is wordy. And there's not a lot of like, it really wasn't designed for teachers. It was designed for just like the general like public who would be paying attention to these things. So what we did was we took these pieces, these bullets, and worked through to try and make this definition here. A simplified, kind of straightforward definition of a disposition, and all of some examples of some of them that are there. Well, the examples basically is what they are. So I'll give you a minute to read through that while I take a drink, and then we'll come back after you get a chance to read it. So here's what I would like you all to take a minute and do before we go. We're going to take a little break here in a minute. But here's what I'd like you to do. In the chat, what disposition are you using right now? Oh, metacognition. Oh, twice. Look at you go, twice. Reflective, excellent. Back, reflective, a lot of reflecting. About thinking. Cool. Love all the metacognition going on in here. Look at that. Look at that. Reflection. I love it. Flexible thinking. Very good. These are great. Reflective thinking. Communicating with clarity. Excellent. Good. I'm glad no one said perseverance. Just kidding, because that'd be funny. Fantastic. So as you can see, like you're choosing, I mean, maybe not consciously, but you're choosing these dispositions. Now, perseverance, there you go, thank you. Now, what I'd like you to do next, this is a little different, is I'd like you to think about a disposition you're not using right now. Think about something that, a disposition that you don't really need to worry about, that you don't have to use right now. This is a harder one. Ooh, a lot of risk takers. Not taking risks. I like it. Cool. Great. That's fantastic. You guys are doing awesome with this. Risk taking. I love it. This is great. So the nice thing about them, right? And I know this is back to that choice part earlier, is that we have control over which ones we're using and which ones are not. You don't need to worry about taking risks right now, right? We don't need to be resilient or taking risk, communicating with clarity, like a lot of things you don't need to worry about right now. And we don't have to, because sometimes we choose not to. And I think about, like, my favorite example is, like, I'm not probably going to be all that responsible driving home tonight because I'm doing 80 on the highway on the way home because I want to go home. It's Friday night. It's a long weekend. I guarantee you I'm not going to be using my responsibility when it comes to how fast I'm driving home. Now, I'm not going to be dangerous, but I'm certainly not going to drive 70 because I want to go home, like the rest of you. So I can choose that, and I understand my choice of it, just like the rest of you are all. There's dispositions you're not using right now, and that's fantastic because you don't need them. Or maybe you do need them and you're just choosing not to do them, right? That's also fantastic. Like, whatever works for you, whatever works best. Let's move to the next piece of this. And this is where we're going to connect it to STEAM. So we've defined dispositions. Seems like everybody has a pretty good understanding of what they are and what they aren't. But now we're going to just take a moment and we're going to connect this up to engagement, which is then going to connect to, like, a STEAM mindset. Because remember, the idea of STEAM is obviously it is content, of course, right? Those letters represent something. But in a STEAM mindset, it's less about, it isn't all about just the content aspect of it. It's about those dispositions that you find that students need to be able to do, like persevere, like overcome failure, like be respectful, like critical thinking, being inquisitive, asking questions, right? Those are STEAM mindset, like, dispositions. So those are also, coincidentally enough, connected to engagement. So what we're going to do is I want you to think about a time in your classroom that you did something that was less structured. Could be anything, right? It could be a student interest project. It could have just been the first day of school with a kindergarten group or a first grade group, and it was time to put your boots on to go outside in the snow. Like something that was a little less structured, maybe not because you haven't developed yet or because you wanted students to have that freedom. And I want you to think about what you noticed about the engagement of those students. And you keep this to yourself. We don't need to share. Just keep that in your mind a little bit. What did you notice about their engagement? And what dispositions, because that's where we're going next, is what dispositions were they using for engagement and which ones weren't they using because they were disengaged, if they were. Take a moment, think about this. Oh. So this comes from a book, Reimagining Student Engagement by Amy Berry, which is a great book. Uh, it's worth the read. It is a bit redundant throughout most of it, so you could probably just read the first, like, 4 chapters and pretty much get the gist of it. But it is a really great book. And one of the things that Amy Berry, who worked with John Hattie a lot in the, like, kind of visible thinking world, developed this continuum of engagement, is what they called it. So you start here from active disengagement to active engagement. And you have this disrupting, avoiding, withdrawing. There's the engagement in the activity and the engagement with peers here. And then you have the engaging aspect, participating, investigating, and driving, and what it looks like in the activity and what it looks like with the peers. But when you think about the less structured activity that you did, and you were thinking about student engagement, do any of these, do you make a connection between that, what you were thinking, and any of these that you might see in this activity or in this engagement with peers? And you can shake your head to yourself, yes, because you probably do. Now, the way that Amy Berry built this out was that engagement is not something that you either have turned on or turned off. That you can be disengaged by withdrawing. You can be engaged by just participating. We want to avoid this end, the disrupting end of disengagement. And in the end, we'd really love students to be here driving their own school, right? Their own education. We want them setting goals, seeking feedback, seeking out challenges, monitoring, evaluating projects. We want them to be able to do that. Where do most kids live? Somewhere in here, probably, somewhere in this general vicinity, right? Think of myself as a student. You know, I was somewhere between participating and withdrawing on the regular. That's basically, I lived right here. There was no way I was doing this, but there I lived kind of right here. It's okay. You know, I became a teacher, so I guess I did okay. But you know, that's kind of where I lived. I didn't really like school very much. You may have, I've met students who live here. I've met a few students who live here, who live in the driving aspect, and a lot who live in this general vicinity here, right? And none of these are bad. Like, this is a continuum, but it's not meant to be like oh, if you have students here participating, then that's bad. No, it absolutely is not. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this. And in some cases, participating is exactly where you want the kids to be. You don't need them driving. You want them doing the work, being on task, paying attention, and responding to questions. That's where they need to be at the time, because that fits the goals of your lesson. Investing, driving, absolutely. We'd like to avoid these, I would bet, the disengagement piece of that. But there they are, right? So these are dispositions by themselves: paying attention, right? Persevering, being on task, quality of work, putting in low effort, right? That's the opposite of doing quality work, which is a disposition. Focusing is a disposition. Being distracted is the opposite of that. Being respectful is the opposite of arguing with your teacher. Seeking out challenges is being curious, which is a disposition. Setting goals, being thinking about thinking, right? That metacognition, that is a disposition. Collaboration with others, being off task, that's the opposite of what we're looking for, right? If we think back to the beginning, off task students, we want them to be on task with other students. We don't want them distracting each other, right? But that's the opposite. So these all connect. This continuum absolutely connects to dispositions, which leads us to the mindset and the dispositions that make up STEAM. Because that's what we're really talking about here, because we're looking at this through that STEAM lens. And if you think about STEAM, and we're going to not think about STEAM from the content perspective right now, okay? I want you to think about STEAM from a STEAM mindset perspective and from a dispositions, because that's what we're talking about today. If you want content stuff, if you want integration stuff, please reach out and we can have a conversation about that anytime. Or come to I'll be doing the integrating STEAM PD I just did in the morning, two more times one in the winter, one in the spring. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the STEAM mindset, that idea of perseverance, right? We're talking about respect. We're talking about those dispositions that fit with that STEAM mindset. But what are they, right? And how do we use them for engagement? Because that's what we're really going for here, is how do we engage students with the STEAM mindset so that they're using those dispositions or practicing those dispositions on their own. That's the goal. So what I'd like you to do, I'm going to drop this in the chat. Oh, Mary, would you drop the Padlet for slide 15 in the chat for me, please, real quick? And the list of dispositions too that's below it. So here's what I'd like you guys all to do for a moment. If you're in a group, that's fine. If you're by yourself, that's fine. Either way is great. I don't care. We're going to do another Padlet. And what I want you to do is I want you to give me your top 5. What are your top 5 dispositions that fit into a STEAM mindset? What are your top 5? Now, I want you to give you a resource. You probably are fantastic. You're going to come up with these on your own. But just in case, I want to give you a resource. And Mary just dropped in the Padlet that we're going to use, which I'll switch over to in a minute. But the second link, the one that says list of dispositions, we have on our interdisciplinary instruction website a professional learning module that is all about dispositions. It's basically this, but like a little bit more specific in some cases, but it doesn't have anything to do with STEAM. But that list of dispositions was something that we built because we wanted people to be able to have that list to be able to see. So if you need a resource to think about your top five dispositions, that list is there as a resource if you want it. If you don't want it, then ignore the fact that there's a link there. Don't worry about that part and just go to the Padlet. So I want to see your top 5s. Oh, it's this. We can see everybody's. Oh, I love it. This is cool. All right, so I won't read them all, but we'll hit on each one just so you can see. I'm willing to bet that as we go through this, you're going to see a lot of similarities, a lot of cross-listing here. So let's see, we've got not in any particular order. Attention to detail, nice one, good. Critical thinking. Patience, yeah, absolutely. Self-reflection. Critical thinking again. Critical thinking again. Ooh, self-discipline. That's a good, interesting idea. I like that a lot. That's a good one. Persistence. Open-mindedness again. That one came up already a couple times. Self-reflection too. Critical thinking, perseverance, responsibility. Grit. This is a book, Grit, that's really, really good. If you've never read it before, it is fantastic. I forget who wrote it, but it's so good. Taking responsible risks. That's a good, interesting one. Cool. Oh, look at you doubling up. That's 6. Cheater. Positive attitude. Great. Cool. Critical thinking again. Risk taking. Good. Critical thinking again. Oh, patience. That's a good one. Empathy. Absolutely. Oh, and tolerance. That's a good one too. This is critical thinking again. Awesome. You guys are really good. This was really fantastic. You all did great lists, and I discovered something new about Padlet, which is also really cool. All right, so thank you very much for that. I am going to present to you and since I'm the presenter, I get to do a top 10 list. So let me shrink this down real quick. And enter full screen. All right, here's my top 10 dispositions for a STEAM mindset. Now, I'm going to bet that all of these seem really familiar. So we've got curiosity and persistence, which I saw in there a couple of times, adaptability, collaboration, which I saw in there a couple of times, critical thinking, which was almost all of them, absolutely, creativity, reflection, which I saw a bunch of times too, empathy, we saw that, communication, and I added one at the bottom of this, and I struggled with this last one of ethical responsibility, but put it on here because there's an aspect of STEAM instruction that I feel, especially when it comes to like emerging technologies, that is worth considering the ethical conundrums, the ethical ramifications of some of the things that are kind of live underneath this STEAM umbrella. So I added it on there. I was on the fence about that one. I think I had something else. I don't remember what it was. Respect maybe on there or something. But I put that on there because I thought it was an interesting way to think about STEAM dispositions. It's from the ethical perspective. So that's my top 10, not in any sort of order, but we had definitely some crossover, which was fantastic. So the next part is going to be about how do we develop these? How do we build this? How do we build a culture of disposition? So define dispositions. We've seen the connection between STEAM and engagement and dispositions. So the last piece of this that we're going to do is focused on how do we actually implement this? What are we going to do? How do we actually like start creating that culture of dispositions in our classrooms? Now, some of this probably will be very familiar because I'm willing to bet that each and every one of you are already doing a lot of these things. The goal of this is twofold. This slide deck, like all my slide decks that I build, really, I don't build them as like people get mad, like give me a hard time about like they're full of hyperlinks, right? Because I build slide decks that are resource vaults for people. That's what I really want. That's what I would have wanted as a teacher is I would have wanted resources from things, not just some talking head blabbering me about stuff. So I build these slide decks out so that they are resources for folks to use. There's quite a few as we travel through here. You'll see that there's quite a few, hyperlinks that are along the way that we can use to for resources as we practice. So that's part of this. The other thing is that there are a lot of times in education, right? There's that one more thing, right? There's that like, you're going to add another thing to my plate without taking something else away, and that I should be teaching dispositions, and I should be integrating agriculture, and I should be integrating technology, and I should be integrating space science, and I should be doing STEAM, and I should be doing, and that's, it's a lot, and I understand that. The goal of this, though, is to make that connection between you're already doing a lot of these things, right? That maybe you can tighten them up a little bit, or you can change the way you go about them, or think about them from a different perspective. But it really is designed to be something that you can just do a little tweak in something you already are doing and get hopefully get a different result, or have a different mindset, or to look at things a little differently and adjust accordingly. That is the idea here, because dispositions by themselves are not real helpful if they're just taught, right? Like we used the second step program in my school before I left, which was great. It kind of anecdotally taught dispositions, and along with other things, a lot of SEL stuff and those kind of things, and it was fantastic. But it really didn't move the needle any because it happened in our advisory, and then we didn't use it anywhere else. It just happened in its own little bubble. The other example I kind of lean into is PBIS. And I like PBIS. I think PBIS is great. My daughter's school is a PBIS school. And they do stickers. They do little paw pride stickers when you're caught doing PBIS. And every time my daughter was a very, very good student, a very conscientious student, very good friend, very good student, she's a great kid. She'll come home with a little paw pride sticker on her shirt. And I'll say, Ella, what'd you get your paw pride sticker for? And she will say, I helped a friend, or somebody fell down on the playground and I helped bring them into the school. It's very behavior focused, right? It's always about, I did this behavior and I was rewarded with this sticker, which is great. She keeps doing it. It's awesome. But my next question to her always is, how does that connect with your school mantra of safe, responsible, and respectful? How does it connect to the dispositions that the school is really going for through that PBIS program. And we'll have a great conversation about it. All of us, my whole family will sit at dinner and have a great conversation about like, oh, is it responsibility or is it respectful? Were you respectful to your friend when you helped them inside when they fell off the swings, or was that a responsible thing to do? We have these really fantastic conversations about these things because in her mind, it's an action that earned that for her, but I want her to make that next connection. And I'm sure the school does it too. I don't know what they do, but I make sure that we do that at home because I feel like it's really important to make that connection to that disposition. So that's an example of something you're already doing. If you're a PBIS school, you're probably already doing something very, very similar to that. But are you connecting it to the disposition, or is it just about the behavior, right? That's a question that you could ask yourself and adjust accordingly, right? So that's the overall goal of these next pieces is we're looking at culture, how to build a culture of this, but we're also looking at things you're already doing and how you can make a small adjustment or rethink a procedure or something like that that might be able to kind of help reinforce or teach dispositions to students so they can be successful. That's the idea. So the way we're going to do that is like this. The first thing we're going to talk about is starting with strengths. Then we're going to look for area for growth. And then we're going to talk about integration and support. Those are the three big ideas of how we're going to build a culture. Now, there are a billion books on how to build culture inside schools, and they're all fantastic. But they're all really dense and they're all really thick and they all have a lot to do with it. So I tried to condense this down into 3 steps as best I could. Is it perfect? Probably not. But at least it gets a place for people to start thinking about this, in a different lens. That's the idea. So if it does that, I have been successful. If it doesn't do that, I apologize because I didn't mean to waste your time. So this is how we're going to go about this. So we're going to start with celebrating the dispositions the students already have. Now, this does not mean every single student, right? If you talk about a class, you might, I'm willing to bet that you probably could, pick a disposition that everybody in the class has. But maybe almost everybody has it, close enough, right? What we're looking for, and maybe not even like everybody has it, but doesn't have it like ingrained in themselves. Like they have, they persevere most of the time, right? That's okay. If everybody else is doing it too, that's worth celebrating. Because the idea here is that we want to recognize and celebrate the dispositions the students already have, because we don't need to worry about those as much. That doesn't mean that they can't be strengthened. It doesn't mean that they can't be practiced. It doesn't mean that we have to just ignore them and be like, boom, we're done. Everybody's great because they all have senses of humor now, right? Like that's not the idea. And in fact, a disposition can never be perfected. You can't be and we're going to talk about this a little bit in assessment, but like I said before, I'm a pretty responsible guy, but I want to be home tonight faster than the speed limit's going to let me go. And I'm going to be irresponsible and I'm going to drive 10 miles an hour over the speed limit tonight because I want to go home. I'm pretty responsible in the rest of my life. I feel like I've got a pretty good head on my shoulders when it comes to that. But not all the time. I'm not perfect because you can't perfect these. There's no way to be proficient at respect, right? We all have our moments where we're like, you just caught me on a bad day and I apologize, but you caught me on a bad day. And I didn't mean to be disrespectful, but that's the way the words came out of my mouth. So just keep that in mind, that when we're thinking about dispositions that students have, it doesn't mean that they have to have them all the time because nobody does, right? We're going to take a moment here. We'll probably do it actually right now after this to think about what disposition you're using right now. And, thinking about like, is that something you do all the time, right? Because we can't perfect them and we don't use them all the time. That's for the control we have. So not only are we looking at celebrating what the students have, we want to recognize that in students. And it may be that it's not even the whole group. It might be small groups. It might be individualized. It might be however you set it up. Like it depends on what you're doing. But we want to start with that because every kid feels better when they feel successful before you tell them where their feedback needs to be, right? Before we start giving them feedback. It's like that It's that sandwich, the compliment sandwich. I never liked that, but basically that's the idea. We start off with something positive, which is important. Then we can start thinking about what is it that we want students to do. So we're going to come back to this for a second here. And we're going to think about this chart again. The teachers say that their students stayed exactly the same, but this time dispositions to consider are on the other side, right? So we're looking at the behaviors again, and I want you to just kind of think back to the beginning about which one of these kind of connected with, and let's start thinking about the dispositions that we're looking for, not just the behaviors that we're looking for, right? So if you had said, our students are apathetic, like there's no quality to their work, how can we add, or they're just not interested in what we're doing? How do we develop that wonder and awe? Or they're afraid to try. So how do we incorporate risk taking, healthy risk taking into the classrooms, right? How do we? This was always mine that I worked on forever with every group I ever worked with. They're satisfied with sloppy and mediocre work, right? So how do we build that disposition of craftsmanship and pride? That's the disposition that we're going to be looking for. And then, of course, like metacognition, thinking about thinking, that's always a big one. So that's where we come to next, is what dispositions need growth and support? And I would love to say that there's some sort of like Myers-Briggs, like there's some sort of like thing that we can just give to kids and be like, oh, yes, you all need support in perseverance, right? But there's not. It is very much observational. What are you seeing that students are struggling with? And that list is probably relatively long. But, and this is the weird part about this. This is like the kind of like the counterintuitive but intuitive piece of this. You're just going to pick one, just one. Whatever the one is either the most pertinent or the one that is the most attainable. Preferably, it would be the same, but that isn't necessarily the case. So if you have, I think about my friend Darcy, who she and I had a conversation last year and the year before about how disrespectful her class was. And we had a conversation about the whole 7th grade and how disrespectful they were. And we had a great conversation about like, how are you going to teach that? And then how are you going to build a culture of that respect? And it was fantastic. And respect was what they fixated on. Did students struggle with perseverance? Yep. Did students struggle with apathy? Yep. Did students struggle with a lot of other dispositions? They sure did. But for that group of teachers and that group of students at the time, that respectful behavior was the one thing that was the most important to focus on for them. So that's what they focused on. Just one. Because, and I say just one to focus on. That doesn't mean you have to ignore everything else, right? If you pick perseverance as the disposition to work on, that doesn't mean that kids get to come in and start calling you swear words and hitting you with pencil erasers. Like, it means you still have your standards, you still have your school rules, you still have your expectations. All of those things are there. You still have conversations with students about what they're doing. You frame it through that disposition lens if you so desire. But when it comes down to it, you are purposefully doing all the things we're going to talk about next for that one disposition. And really diving deep into it. And then when it's good and everybody is, and again, you can't perfect this. There's no proficiency here. Once everybody is in a relatively good place, keep practicing it, but move on to another one, right? Or maybe a relatively smaller one that isn't such a big deal, that is easily attainable, right? And you work your way through it, but you don't give up on that first one. You keep practicing it. You keep providing opportunities for students to use it, but you can move on to something else afterwards, which usually doesn't happen because it takes it takes quite a long time to change that behavior. But it also depends on the grade level and the students that you're working with as well. I think that population makes a huge difference. So pick one. That's the trick, and it's observational. Now you can either do this, because there's a lot of ways to organize this out. Either as a grade level team, and I don't, like, they're all in different places, so like I don't know how your schools are organized, but like there were 4 of us on my teaching team. The 4 of us would pick one disposition that we were all 4 going to focus on. So that's one way you could do it. If you're If you're in a self-contained classroom, well, you don't have to talk to anybody else. You get to pick, right? Choose your own. Or if you're part of a team and the rest of the team doesn't want anything to do with it, which absolutely happens, then it's just you and you do it in your classroom. And hopefully the rest of them will get on board. But if they don't, then you pick the one that you want. If you have older students that are maybe a little bit more mature, maybe you talk to them about it and have the work together on that and conference on it and see what it is that tell them what you're seeing, get feedback back from them, and decide together as a group what you want to work on. It really is dependent upon your situation. But the most important thing of all the things I just said is pick one, just one. That's it. More than that, you're going to pull your hair out and nobody's going to get anything out of it. It's just going to be like, it's like whack-a-mole. It just won't get you anywhere. So now you've picked your one, whatever it might be. And chances are you probably have one in mind right now that you're like, oh, I know which one I'm going to start working on. And that's fantastic. Keep that in your head, because here's how we go about doing this. Because we're talking about integration and support. So some things that are really important to consider. We have to assume that no matter what age kids are in, they don't know what it is, right? This makes more sense, I think, at the elementary school because they really don't. But if you have a 18, 17-year-old kid in high school, right? He's in Van Buren in your HVAC class, and he just is just irresponsible, just not a very responsible young person, right? Does he know what it means to be responsible? Like, does he have a working understanding of what it is? Maybe that's the culture in their home, is the whatever it is, that irresponsibility, or maybe it's just something he's developed over time, right? But does he understand, or she understand, what it is to be responsible, what that means, what skills you have to be able to do that? And if they don't, then we have to teach it. We have to go down and figure out how we're going to teach this. And there are lots of ways to do this, and we're not going to get into those because that would take forever. But some kind of big things to hit on. Make sure that there's a deep understanding, that everybody's on board. Direct instruction sometimes is just as useful as anything else. That's not responsible. This is responsible. And then role play, right? Or talk about what they mean to each other. Like, have a conversation, have it open. Examples. Have students do examples. Like I said, role playing, pick it up, practicing it, those kind of things just at the beginning until they're feeling better with it and feeling more comfortable. Those are really, really important. And then somebody asked earlier about modeling, right? Yeah, modeling for the teacher, but also from pointing out models of students that are doing it as well. And again, not in a public way, not in that like, oh, Mary's doing a really good job of focusing on this Zoom, because if I talk about feedback, she's going to know that it's time to throw the feedback form in, which I'm not, Mary. But she's doing that really good thing. And I don't want to point that out to the whole empty room here and be like, hey, everybody, Mary's doing a great job. Like that doesn't get us anywhere. But if I was to go to that student who I was talking about earlier, and I said, hey, I want you to take a look, just look over there for a moment. Just you and I, we're just having a conversation here. I just want you to look, and let's take a look and see where we see the aspects of responsibility. What are they doing that shows responsibility, that they're being responsible or respectful or whatever. And it's a conversation, right? It's not a pointing out like, Bill, look at Mary, right? Because that's not the point of this. It's not to call people out. It's not to even embarrass, in this case, embarrass Mary or embarrass anybody else and be like, oh, shoot, why is this person talking about me, right? That's not the goal here. It's a conversation, because that's how we change things, is by personalizing and building that relationship. So modeling from you as the educator, but also pointing out places where that's modeled in other places as well. And probably the most important is that everybody uses the same words. Common vocabulary on this. Everybody knows what the words mean and can use them, right? Because again, what's responsible or respectful or perseverance to one person may not be to somebody else because of all sorts of reasons, right? So as a group, we have decided these are the vocabulary words, these are the things that we talk about when we speak about being responsible, about being respectful, about communication, about ethics, about empathy, right? These are the words that we use. And then once everybody's on board, then you just use the words, right? And if somebody doesn't use the word, you politely correct them, be like, oh, did you mean this? And they'll be like, oh yeah, sorry, new vocabulary. It's hard to remember sometimes. Um, right? Like, so you point it out. You really make the case to really purposefully make sure everybody's on board with that. And you literally teach it. And I always run into this, and I agree with this. Like, when would I do that? And I don't remember who it was. I've heard it from lots of people who say, and my principal that I worked with for was did not believe this, but I believe it's true that that like at the beginning of the year, right? Um, you set those, and elementary school teachers are great at this. You start setting those expectations, right? You start setting those routines, right? You start doing all of that pre-work at the beginning of the year, and academics maybe take a back seat for a little bit, and because in order for your classroom to function well for the rest of the year, students need to know that these are the routines that they follow, these are the procedures that they follow, right? You all do that. We all build those at the beginning of the year with our students, regardless of whether you teach elementary or high school. You all do the exact same thing. It might look very, very different depending on your school and depending on your classroom, but we all do it. So if the reason that we do that is so that we can make our lives easier in January or February or March, right? Because you can be like, whoa, hold on, that's not how we do this, remember? And then we go back to the way we were. So I would argue that if a disposition is something that needs to be focused on, because it is so, because it's whatever the one disposition you picked, if you picked it, then it's important enough to take the time to teach it and do it now, because that will give you and your students plenty of time to practice so that once June comes around, they can be respectful and responsible all summer when you're not there. So that, they can be ready for the next teacher or whoever by springtime, whatever. But that's my point is that if it's worth doing, it's worth taking the time to do. If it's important, it's important. Academics, I'm not saying don't do academics. It's not what I'm saying at all. So please don't call and complain. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if it's important enough that you want to focus on it, then it's important enough to take the time to teach it. That's all I'm saying. But then it's also important to practice it, because once they understand it, they have to practice it. And in order to practice it, they need to practice it in authentic ways, back to that roadmap idea, right? So they have the map, they know the trail they're supposed to go on, and they know the little deviations of what happens when they get off their trail. They know what they're supposed to do because they can't carry around a checklist. So we practice, and we practice it in authentic ways, which is where the next piece comes in about integrating it into your targets, into your classroom on a regular basis. So you can just write them right in. I don't, if you do learning targets, some people do, some people don't, but you probably have, like, at the beginning of every class, you probably start with whatever the goals of the lesson for the day are, right? Even if you don't write it down, you still mention it to kids so they know where we're going. And in there, right, like, and I have that one on the bottom there, I can apply past knowledge of editing skills while writing a summary of the article, right? Applying past knowledge is a disposition, right? It's using what you've already done. So I'm using that. That's what I've decided to focus on for this. Like, my disposition is applying prior learning, and I'm putting that into my learning target with the content of editing and writing a summary, right? That's my target. Is it the only one? Probably not. I would do more than that, but that's just an example because that's where we're going to start. So make it a part of what you're doing, like really, truly integrate it into everything you possibly can, into your expectations in your classroom, everywhere you can put those things in there. If you put it into your learning targets, then kids see it all the time. and they recognize, oh yeah, I got to remember to do that thing, whatever it might be that you're practicing. Back to the authentic piece, absolutely. We got to practice these things in real life situations. You can do that in a couple of different ways. One way is working with community partners. There's nothing more authentic for a kid than talking to someone that's not their teacher, because eventually they'll have to do that, or they probably already do that. But that's the goal of kids, right? That's the goal of school, is to create adults who can function in the world. So if that's the case, then why don't we just bring people in, not random people, but people that we've, you know how it works, bring volunteers in, bring people from the community in that students can practice with, shaking hands, or having a conversation, or being responsible about something, like having them connect in some way. So using community partners is a great way to do it. I always love the idea of a quest inside of school. Like, I love gamification and game-based learning in my classroom. Those are my favorites. But like, you can absolutely make quests where kids have to show responsibility, to move to the next level of their quest, or when enough of people are doing this, or whatever. Like, you build your quest however you want to build your quest, but that's it's kind of a fun way to practice that, and then you work it into your classroom. Any of the PBL stuff, those opportunities to practice, voice and choice, and talking to adults, doing research, and making a thing, and sharing that thing with an audience, and working as a team, and all those things that come with like those kind of based learnings, those project-based, place-based PBLs, land-based, whatever, based, all those things. They all have the same characteristics in place. But those are fantastic ways for kids to authentically practice those dispositions, especially if it's something like quality of work, or apathy, or any of those things, because it offers up students choice a little bit. Feedback, I feel like, is also a really important one, and how we frame it can also be a big piece of this. So I put 2 examples on here. So you're working so hard to focus on your assignment, keep it up, right? That focuses on the act. You're doing a thing, this specific thing, and it's back to that paw pride thing. You're doing this activity, and I'm giving you a sticker. Great. Or you could frame that feedback as, you keep focusing on your assignment, or you're doing great. Not you're doing great, because you don't want to take take the person out of it sometimes, but keep focusing on your assignment. Personalize it. You're working so hard to focus on your assignment. Keep going, right? You can absolutely personalize it. I didn't, but you totally can. And it's a quiet feedback, right? It's a feedback that's not public at all. It's just quiet, over the shoulder, just reach down, right? Or a note or something that's not in any way public to kids, right? Unless you know that that kid really enjoys it, but it will absolutely backfire most of the time. So just keep it quiet, and just make a comment like, oh, you're working so hard to stay focused on your assignment right now. I recognize that. Keep going. You're doing fantastic, right? And then move on. That's the kind of feedback that we're talking about here, because it's in a way it's reflective, but it also recognizes the effort that the student's putting in to be able to do the thing that they're doing, because that is hard, right? Like, putting into effort things is difficult sometimes. And then, and by the way, just for the authenticity piece, the hyperlinks that are here, these thinking protocols and this visible thinking piece here, are just hyperlinks that have some really great protocols for thinking about not dispositions specifically, but there's enough of them that there are enough of them in there that are broad enough that dispositions would fit into those. I forgot to mention those. I'm sorry, because the last one has a link here too. Is reflection, and again, reflection is a disposition, and it needs to be taught. It's as simple as that. I know I have absolutely made the assumption my 7th graders could reflect, and I was 100% wrong. Every time. I make the assumption that adults can reflect, and I'm 100% wrong. I mean, not all the time, but I am wrong a lot. Because it's a skill. It's something that we need to teach, right? Thinking about thinking. It's hard. It's hard to think about stuff like that. So we need to teach reflection. Now, if you haven't taught it already, or it's part of it might be your disposition that you're working with right now, like we're going to focus on reflection, those are great. But it is a really important opportunity for students to reflect on their disposition that they're specifically, the one that the whole classes or the whole group or a group of kids are working on. And that hyperlink that's on there are some sentence starters and reflection protocols, because we don't want to run into that problem of like, tell me what you did well and tell me where you need to improve. Those are okay for reflection, but really we need to give kids a little bit more structure, especially if you're teaching it, but also if you're not teaching it, but reflection is still an important part of that. A sentence starter of thinking protocol or a reflection protocol can make it easier for kids to be able to reflect. It could also be like a really specific question. But those just give kids something to start off of. So that hyperlink that's on the slide deck, the sentence starters and reflection protocols, those are really, really useful. I use those a lot in my practice. So they're all there for you to use. And then the last part is assessment. Now, I put this on here because the school that I came from assessed our habits of scholarship. They were on report cards. There was even conversation during the great standards-based grading conversation that we had whatever years ago of basing in my school of basing like sports eligibility on those habits of scholarship, on those dispositions the students had, creating an honor roll of those things. And it was a conversation and it didn't go anywhere, and that's fine. And the reason that it didn't go anywhere is because for the most part, the end of the quarter would come, everybody would have their grades in there, and then they'd all go through and they try to remember the behaviors of every single student for every single one of those dispositions from beginning to end and put a 1 through 4 score in there. And it was unfair. Truly was unfair, because there's just inherent bias in that. There was just human bias, unintentional bias, but just bias, because we're going to keep track of oh, perfect. I'll answer that in a second. We're going to remember those last few weeks better than we are the first few weeks, right? If you have an 8-week quarter, you're going to remember the 4 weeks at the end and better than you're going to remember the 4 weeks at the beginning. And if there is that regression, then I don't know, like, how does that fall? How do you score that? How do you put a number on that, right? How are we assessing if regression happens multiple times before the end of the year, or do we keep track of it as we go? Perfect. I'll get to that in a moment. So it's inherently unfair. So if you have to score, right, how do we keep track of it as we go? Exactly. How do we do that? And I don't really have a great answer to that. I have the way that I did it, but it was tedious. And it was literally to check it every day. I had 100 students. It took me forever. But I did it because I wanted to see how it would work. The other way to go about this are these kind of ideas on the rest of the slide. So first, we need to keep in mind, and I've said this a couple of times already, that we're never, students and adults, we are never going to perfect dispositions. We're never going to master it. We're looking for growth, right? If you have to score it, you're not scoring proficiency. You're scoring, you're doing the best you can. And the more measures that you have, the more accurate you can be with that scoring. So I would argue that you would do it multiple times, that you would keep track, not necessarily every day, because I did that and it was really hard. And if I had stuff to do after school, I would forget, or if I was just lazy and being irresponsible, right? Because I am sometimes, I would just not do it if I had a bad day. So keeping track daily, I do not recommend that unless you have a small group of kids and you can like physically do that. But I physically, I just couldn't keep up with it. It just wasn't working. So what I moved to was more of a kind of check-in model. And there was there's always those kind of like weird days every few weeks where there's something going on, like there's an assembly or there's something that's going to mess the day up a little bit. Um, so I would take advantage of those kind of weird days and do just a quick just do observation, and I would just give myself a check mark every few weeks of like, all right, I remember this about this kid, and I would just do it every so often, right? To take the, we did quarters, so every 2 weeks I would try to get some sort of measure for me to be able to use, and that at least gave me something so that I wasn't only thinking about the end of the last 4 weeks or the last 2 weeks. I had some data to help me throughout the time, but that was all observational. Never once did I ever let kids self-assess. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't think of it, to be perfectly honest. I just didn't cross my mind. But self-assessment, I think, is a great thing to try with this too. And that's another data point. Now, you can absolutely disagree with what students are saying. Like if they're like, I'm doing fantastic, and in reality, they're not, then perhaps it's time to have a little bit of an interview or maybe some goal setting with that student. Be like, look, man, look, whatever. Like, I recognize you said this stuff about you. Here's what I'm seeing. We should probably have a conversation about what's going on here because I'm not sure how reflective you're being about this. You'd say it nicer than that, but we're going to run out of time. So take the time and set that goal and be like, well, let's see if we can come up with it. And then talk about the vocabulary. And if you've built that base already of that pre-teaching, then you have the vocabulary, you have all the words to use, you have all the pieces that you need. And then you take those at the end of the quarter or at the end of the semester or at the end of the trimester or however you do it. And then you have multiple data points to work off of. I tried with, and then I left the classroom to come to the DOE. I was just starting to experiment with rubrics a little bit with this before I left, and I was using those with students for interviews, just real quick ones, not like spend a whole day talking about like whatever about like academic goals, but like really just being like just checking in while it's like a working period or kids are getting caught up or whatever, and just checking in with each kid and being like, hey, let's look at this together real quick. And we'd go through it and be like, what are we hitting? And then we could have that conversation just using that like kind of analytical rubric of, yep, nope, yep, yep, and giving us like going to together and just scoring it. And it only took 2 minutes. Like it didn't take very long. And it was personal. We could have conversations, right? If they saw something and I didn't, or I saw something and they didn't, which was usually the case, it was a great opportunity to have a quick conversation about it, especially if it's positive, because that gives that like, you're doing really good with this. Now we need to move our way. You've done fantastic with this piece. Now we need to focus on this piece. And you just keep going. And you build that rubric based on that common vocabulary, based on that direct instruction, based on all the things you did at the beginning to teach kids that disposition. That's the idea. Then you build a rubric that goes with it. And I did it, like I said, I did it for a year. I'd done other versions before that, not with the rubric, but the different ideas of mostly observational to gather that data. And the rubric was the one that seemed to work the best because it was tangible, it was concrete, that everything was there. It was always the same rubric every week. So there was no need to like learn a new words or like go back over and look at things. We could just use the same one. We could compare from week to week to look for growth or regression in some cases. We really could. It was the best. I wish I had more time to experiment with it, but I left and came to the DOE instead. But if anybody is using a rubric or wants to play with that idea a little bit, reach out because I'd really love to connect with you about what that looks like and how that works. especially like instead of doing it daily, if it's weekly or biweekly. That'd be, I'd really love to talk to you some more about that because that'd be great. Um, and the last one is goal setting, check-ins, like those kind of go hand in hand with the rubric of those. And then if you have to score, think about it from that perspective of growth as much as you possibly can. And I mean, I don't want to, I'm not going to advocate for artificially inflating things, but do be cognizant of if your school has some sort of connection outside, like we were talking about how like we were going to base eligibility for sports on our Habitat scholarship. If that is the case, and then maybe not a lot of growth, but a little bit of growth, it always is nice to give kids the benefit of the doubt, especially if it is going to have some sort of consequence that might be bigger than just like, oh, I got a 2 on my report card for responsibility and nobody cares. So just I'm saying that because it was something that I was very concerned about when we were having that conversation, because of the reasons that I just mentioned, because it's very much the end of you're only thinking about the last 2 weeks, and that it does have a consequence. So multiple data points is helpful, and all of those things that are on the slide here are just some ways to do it. Billy Jean, did that answer? Is that what you were going for? Does that help? Hope so. And if not, please, questions for the most part, yes. Do you want to pop off mic and ask, or do you want to, let's see if I can find you. Do you want to talk more about it, like ask more questions? Throw up your hand, I can find you and unmute you. Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Well, and the other thing too is, so yeah, but and reach out. Like we can have a conversation about this anytime. Like this, my job is to support teachers throughout the state, not just in STEAM, but in everything. So talk to your team, and if you need more information, need more resources, please just, my email is going to come up in a moment. Just send me a quick message, and I'll get right back to you as soon as I can with whatever you need, and we can set up a Zoom and chat about it. Just true for everybody, not just for Billie Jean, but you're all welcome to email me anytime and just say hi, because why not? All right, so I'm going to pause before we talk about these. I'm going to pause real quick and check in with everyone about questions, comments, because we're just about done. But I'll make sure everybody's cool before we move to the end. Weird wait time in Zoom. It always feels like an hour. Okay, then before we finish up, one last check-in with everybody. I would like you to please throw in the chat, what disposition are you using right now? And perseverance is a fine answer, because it is 2:30 on a Friday before a long weekend, and I am also persevering right now, and I love what I do. So please throw it in there. Let's just take a check-in, and then we'll finish up. We'll do feedback and do contact hours, and we'll be out of here. Oh, cool. That's an interesting one. I like that one. Collective, great. Oh, cool. Yes. Perseverance, 100%. Reflection, reflection. Cool. Great. So much reflection. I love it. I love it. And perseverance, 100%. I'm there too. Very good. Very good. I appreciate all of those. Thank you. And in fact, I do want to just make a kind of just an observation of dispositions, if I will, if you would allow me for a moment. The 2:30 Friday afternoon, before a long weekend. The uh, participation has been fantastic for a Zoom. Like this is you all have been amazing. This has been really great. So I appreciate all of that. Thank you all so very much. These work a lot better when people are when we have some interaction, and you all have been amazing. So thank you all so much for your participation today, and for all of your perseverance, and your reflection, and your curiosities, and all of that. It was fantastic. So thank you. Let's finish up real quick. So this is just a list of resources. If you're interested, by the way, in the Dispositions book that Arthur Costa and Bennett Gaelic wrote, I do believe that I'm going to be doing a book study this spring. I have a whole bunch of these books at the DOE. Last 2 years ago, I did an asynchronous book study with this Dispositions book. But I'll probably do another one. So if this is something you want to learn a little bit more about and spend some time with, once I get the next slide has some links on it that will help you to follow whatever we're doing. So if I do offer it again, you'll know because you'll see it in our newsletter or whatever. But these are all some really great resources. There's that Dispositions book. Uh, Arthur Costa and Bennett Gaelic also run like a Habits of Mind like institute. You can get like it's like a course. You can take like a course in it. It's really cool. But also some other things, growth mindset stuff from Carol DeWitt, but not like the actual like growth mindset stuff, not the whatever like the what education did to growth mindset, but actual growth mindset work. Captain Dispositions is really cool if you're a K6 or you have know a K6 teacher who's thinking about this. Captain Dispositions is a cool kind of fun elementary version of Dispositions work that's really great. The other thing that we didn't talk about was the dispositions, the importance of dispositions when it comes to career readiness. I took it out because it didn't fit with what we're doing, and I want to make sure we didn't run out of time. Um, so that is another aspect of dispositions, because when you talk to employers, and that's what this article talks about here, they're looking for those dispositions over skills in a lot of cases, because they'll teach the skill to the person because it'll be done the way they want it done, but they're not going to take the time to teach responsibility and perseverance or healthy risk taking. But they'll happily teach you how to use a CNC machine and do it correctly to the way they want you to do it, but not if you don't ever show up for work. So this article talks a lot about like why employers moving forward are looking for those dispositions more than the set of skills that you have. And then the list of dispositions is here that we talked about earlier, and then some metacognition ideas for reflection are there. I mentioned this a minute ago. This page has all of the interdisciplinary instruction stuff in it, all our hyperlinks to all our different things. We're going to be offering our learning management system is called Engine. We're going to be offering some synchronous and asynchronous PD through our learning management system. In fact, the question formulation technique is out in the newsroom now to sign up for. It's sign up until October 21st. So if you go to the DOE newsroom, you'll be able to see that there. And just search question formulation technique for the sign up form. But we offer all sorts of asynchronous book studies and other things that you can pull from. That's here. This link here will take you to our professional learning schedule, which will I'll keep updating with the activities that we have kind of coming up. We also have a newsletter that I send out every month that is discipline and interdisciplinary focused, but it's also where we put things. So like if I'm going to be doing a book study, I'll put it in our newsletter. If we're doing question formulation or modern literacies or whatever, we'll put those in our newsletter too. So our newsletter is absolutely worth a follow. I curate it. We curate it. It's not just a list of garbage. It really is a very, we really take the time to make sure that it's done well. So, and it's once a month. It's not multiple times a week, just once a month. There's our professional learning page, our homepage. We've also just finished finishing up these hubs here. So these are STEAM, literacy, numeracy, and civics hubs, which have hyperlinks to all sorts of different aspects of STEAM to literacy, right, to all the different pieces here. We have Arts and Humanities Hub will be coming soon. We're just getting started on that now. So once that's up, we'll be advertising that in our newsletter, but you can also find it on our homepage. So this page has all the kind of major links of all the major things that we're working on as a team. Our professional learning page has the dispositions thing we just did is all there asynchronously. So if you're like, oh, that was really great, minus the Steam part, the Steam part's not in it, but the rest of the stuff is all from that. So if you're like, oh, that was really great, I want somebody, I'm going to share this with somebody else, there, it's the asynchronous version is on our professional learning page. So it's there. That's me. Reach out anytime.